The cold streets of Chicago. It was a bitter December evening in Chicago. The air carried a biting chill, a reminder that winter had truly arrived. The bustling streets hummed with the busy rhythm of the season. Cars honked as they navigated the crowded intersections, their tires crunching against the slush that had accumulated from the first snow. The faint glow of Christmas lights flickered in shop windows, casting a warm, inviting glow on the faces of holiday shoppers. There was an air of cheer that contrasted sharply with the dismal reality of some lives that went unnoticed in the city's underbelly. In a forgotten corner of the city, 16-year-old Ellie sat on the cold stone steps of an abandoned bookstore, her knees drawn up to her chest for warmth. Her once vibrant coat was now threadbare and stained, the fraying fabric offering little protection against the harsh winter wind. It had been over a year since Ellie had called these streets her home. After losing her mother at the age of 12, she had bounced from one foster home to another, each one more heart-wrenching than the last. Eventually, she had fallen through the cracks, slipping into homelessness with no family to call her own. Ellie had learned how to survive the hard way, through grit, resourcefulness, and the rare kindness of strangers. But kindness, she knew, was scarce. Most people, wrapped up in their own lives, would glance at her for a moment and look away, unwilling to see the young girl in the torn coat huddling against the cold. She had come to expect it. As Ellie sat huddled, trying to warm her hands over a small fire she had managed to make from a few sticks of dry wood, she heard it, a faint cry, barely audible above the wind's howling. For a moment, she thought it was the wind playing tricks on her. But then the cry grew louder, more desperate. "Someone, please help." Ellie stiffened. She wasn't used to hearing someone call out for help, not in a place like this. It was always her, the one ignored by the world. Her instincts told her to ignore it, to stay in the shadows and not get involved. But something about the voice, a note of urgency, tugged at her heart. Hesitantly, she stood up, her body stiff from the cold, and followed the sound of the cry around the corner. The streets here were darker, the lights from the busy avenues barely reaching this neglected part of the city. Ellie turned the corner and froze. A woman, perhaps in her early 30s, was sitting on the icy pavement. Her designer coat, once a rich shade of burgundy, was soaked through with snow and slush, the hem dragging in the muck. Her makeup, which had once been carefully applied, was now smeared from tears, her face pale and contorted in pain. She was clutching her ankle, which had twisted at an awkward angle, her eyes wide with panic. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. The woman looked up at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and relief. I slipped," the woman said, her voice shaky. "I think I sprained my ankle. My phone's dead, and I can't get up." Ellie glanced around. They were alone here, and no one seemed to notice them. People hurried by, too busy with their own affairs to spare a second glance at the woman in distress. But Ellie, her heart aching with empathy, couldn't just walk away. She knew what it felt like to be invisible to the world, to be left to fend for yourself with no one to help. And she couldn't let this woman experience that same loneliness. She knelt down beside the woman, her breath visible in the cold air. "Here," she said gently, "let me help." The woman looked at Ellie, her expression hesitant. "I don't want to be a burden," she murmured, but Ellie was already gathering the scattered contents of the woman's handbag from the street. She placed the wallet, phone, and other items back into the bag with a quiet determination. With surprising strength, Ellie helped the woman to her feet. She was thin and frail, but the years of surviving on the streets had made her stronger than anyone would have guessed. The woman winced with each step, but Ellie stayed by her side, steadying her and supporting her weight as they made their way to a nearby bench. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Ellie shrugged, brushing the hair from her face. "You would have figured it out. People like you always do." The woman looked at her in surprise, the bitterness in Ellie's words more poignant than she had expected. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her brow furrowing. Ellie hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should reveal the truth. But the words slipped out before she could stop them. You're rich," she said, her voice a little bitter. "People like you don't have to worry about getting by. People like you always have someone to help you." The woman's face softened. She was silent for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. "My name is Vanessa," she said, "and I can't let you think that's the case. You deserve help too." She handed Ellie the card. "Come to this address tomorrow. I'll make sure you get the help you need." Ellie glanced at the card skeptically. She had heard plenty of empty promises before, from people who claimed to want to help, only to forget about her the next day. But something in the woman's eyes, something genuine, made Ellie hold onto that card like it was a lifeline. That night, as she lay on the cold ground, wrapped in her tattered coat, Ellie couldn't help but wonder if Vanessa was truly different. Would she keep her word? Or would this be just another cruel joke that life had played on her? She tossed and turned through the night, the freezing cold seeping into her bones. But by morning, a strange feeling had taken root in her heart. Hope. It was a fragile thing, but it was there. Ellie decided to go. Despite the doubts that swirled in her mind, she stood up early the next day, stuffed the business card into her pocket, and set off for the address Vanessa had given her. When she arrived, Ellie felt out of place. The towering glass building loomed over her, an imposing symbol of everything she had never had. But she clenched her fists and walked in, her heart pounding. The receptionist at the front desk greeted her with a warm smile, as though she was just another person in the bustling office. "Ellie," the receptionist asked, "Vanessa is expecting you." Vanessa was waiting for her in a luxurious office, a stark contrast to the cold, empty streets where they had met. The woman's ankle was wrapped, but her smile was as bright as ever. "I'm so glad you came," Vanessa exclaimed, her voice filled with relief. She gestured for Ellie to sit down. "I know this is a lot, but please, let me explain." Ellie settled into the plush chair, feeling both out of place and strangely at ease. Vanessa began to speak, and as she did, Ellie learned something that would change her life forever. Vanessa wasn't just another wealthy woman looking to do good out of guilt. She was the heir to one of the country's largest family fortunes, but her relationship with her family had been strained for years due to deep moral disagreements about their business practices. "I've been trying to find a way to use my wealth for good," Vanessa explained, her voice breaking with emotion. "Meeting you, it was a sign. You reminded me of what truly matters." Vanessa didn't just offer Ellie a meal or a bed for the night. She offered Ellie something far more valuable: a chance at a new life. She enrolled Ellie in a program for homeless youth, ensuring she received therapy, education, and the kind of support she had never known. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Ellie, one she had never dared to dream about. And it all started on that cold December evening, with one act of kindness that would change both of their lives forever. A new beginning. The following morning, as the city of Chicago slowly awakened from its winter slumber, Ellie found herself standing in front of the glass and steel skyscraper Vanessa had sent her to. The building was imposing, a symbol of wealth and power that made Ellie feel small, insignificant, even more so than she already did on the streets. For a brief moment, the familiar sense of doubt and uncertainty crept in. Maybe she was just imagining things. Maybe Vanessa's offer was nothing more than a fleeting gesture of sympathy, an attempt to ease her conscience. It wasn't unusual for people like her, the ones who had everything, to throw out promises like breadcrumbs, thinking that small gestures could somehow absolve them. But there was something different about Vanessa. When Ellie had met her in the street, it wasn't just the concern in her eyes that had caught Ellie's attention. It was the fact that she had seen Ellie, not as an obstacle, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person. In that brief exchange, Ellie had been seen, and for the first time in a long while, That feeling brought a spark of hope. Shaking off her doubts, Ellie stepped inside the building. The warmth from the lobby hit her like a wave, and for a second, it felt as though she had entered a completely different world. The floors were polished marble, gleaming under the soft light of designer lamps that hung from the high ceilings. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a polite smile, greeted Ellie as if she belonged there. "Ellie, you're expected. Miss Vanessa is waiting for you," the receptionist said, her voice smooth and welcoming. It felt surreal. Ellie was escorted to the elevators, where she was greeted by a glass-walled ride that ascended to the higher floors. The elevator doors opened onto a floor that felt like it belonged to another world, a stark contrast to the cold streets, the dim alleyways, and the abandoned bookstore that had been her home. The carpet was thick, the walls adorned with abstract art, and the air carried the subtle scent of luxury. It was an overwhelming feeling, like being transported from a world of struggle into one of privilege that she had never known. Vanessa was waiting for her in an office that was almost too grand to believe. The large windows looked out over the city, the skyline sprawling below them like something out of a movie. Vanessa was seated behind a polished wooden desk, her ankle wrapped in a neat bandage. She smiled warmly when Ellie entered, her eyes lighting up with genuine happiness. "I'm so glad you came, Ellie," Vanessa said, her voice gentle, but filled with a weight of sincerity. "Please, have a seat. Let me explain everything." Ellie sat down in the plush chair across from Vanessa, feeling both uncomfortable and yet strangely at ease. The unfamiliarity of it all was overwhelming. This wasn't the cold, hard world she had grown accustomed to. It wasn't the streets. This was something entirely different. Vanessa took a deep breath before speaking again. "I know this is a lot to take in. You must have so many questions, and I'm happy to answer them all. But first, I need to tell you something about myself." Ellie listened intently as Vanessa shared her story. She was, as Ellie had guessed, from a wealthy family, one of the most powerful in the country. But behind the wealth and power was a woman who had spent years fighting against the very thing that had made her family successful: greed. Vanessa had been estranged from her family for years due to a deep moral rift over how they conducted their business. While they sought to expand their empire at any cost, Vanessa had sought to find ways to use her wealth to help others, to make a real difference in the world. But it had been a difficult journey, one that had left her feeling isolated and unsure of her place in the world. "I've been trying to find a way to use my position for good," Vanessa explained, her voice breaking slightly. "Meeting you, Ellie, it was like a wake-up call. You reminded me of what truly matters. I spent so long being angry at my family, at the world, that I lost sight of why I wanted to make a change in the first place. I've been so focused on my own hurt that I forgot about the people who need help the most." Ellie absorbed every word, the weight of Vanessa's confession settling in her chest. For someone who had spent so much time in the shadows, feeling forgotten and overlooked, hearing someone with so much power and privilege speak so honestly about their struggles was jarring. It was raw and real in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't just talking about helping people as some abstract concept. Vanessa was speaking about change, about making a tangible difference, and Ellie could feel the sincerity in her words. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes softening as she looked at Ellie. "I want to help you, Ellie. I don't just want to give you a place to stay or a meal for the night. I want to help you build a future, to help you find your way. I know it won't be easy, but I'll be here every step of the way. And I promise you won't have to do it alone." Ellie was silent for a moment, the words sinking in slowly. It was hard to believe. It felt too good to be true. In her world, people didn't just offer their help out of the goodness of their hearts. People had ulterior motives, or they simply didn't care. But there was something in Vanessa's voice, something in her eyes, that made Ellie want to believe her. "You really mean it?" Ellie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa smiled, the warmth in her expression undeniable. "Yes, I mean it. This is a new beginning for you, Ellie. And it starts right here. Vanessa didn't just offer Ellie temporary help. She introduced her to a network of resources and organizations dedicated to supporting homeless youth. She enrolled Ellie in a special program designed to provide not just shelter, but education, therapy, and job training. For the first time, Ellie found herself in an environment that wasn't about survival. It was about living. It was about building, growing, and finding purpose. The first few weeks in the program were difficult for Ellie. She was overwhelmed by the structure, the expectations, and the newness of it all. But Vanessa never wavered. She called Ellie regularly, checking in on her progress and offering encouragement. Slowly but surely, Ellie began to trust again. She had been burned by too many empty promises in her life to embrace this new chance wholeheartedly. But little by little, the walls she had built around her heart started to crack. Over time, Ellie started attending therapy sessions, something she had never considered before. She had always been too busy fighting to survive to ever think about her emotional well-being. But the more she spoke to the therapists, the more she began to understand how the weight of her past had shaped who she was. Her pain, her sense of abandonment, her fear of trusting others, all of it had been holding her back. With Vanessa's help, Ellie began to see that she wasn't defined by her past. She could create her own future. Vanessa was always there, a steady presence in her life. She would take Ellie out to dinner, encourage her to try new things, and show her that there was a world beyond the streets. Vanessa didn't try to change Ellie, but she offered her the tools to change herself. One day, after months of building her new life, Ellie found herself standing at the front of a room filled with people. It was a charity gala, an event Vanessa had organized to raise money for homeless teens like Ellie. Vanessa had invited her to speak, to share her story with the donors who had supported the program. Ellie stood at the microphone, dressed in a beautiful gown that Vanessa had given her heart pounding in her chest. The lights were blinding, and the sea of faces staring up at her seemed impossible to navigate. But then, Ellie spotted Vanessa sitting in the front row, her face filled with pride. That was all Ellie needed. "I thought my life was over," Ellie began, her voice shaking slightly at first. "I thought there was no way out, no future for someone like me. But then I met Vanessa. She didn't just change my life, she saved it. She showed me that I was worthy of love, of support, and of a future. And now I want to help others the way she helped me." As she spoke, Ellie's voice grew stronger, her words more confident. The room erupted in applause, but it was Vanessa's smile that meant the most to Ellie. It was a smile of love, of hope, and of a bond that had been forged in the most unlikely of places, a bond that would never be broken. The road ahead, the days that followed Ellie's speech at the charity gala, were nothing short of transformative. What had once felt like an unimaginable dream had now begun to feel like a tangible reality. For the first time in years, Ellie was no longer just surviving. She was living. There was a deep, almost comforting weight to her new life, one that she wasn't quite sure how to handle at first, but with each passing day, she began to understand its meaning. Vanessa, with her unwavering faith in Ellie, had offered her more than just resources or opportunities. She had offered Ellie the courage to hope again. And Ellie, for the first time, was learning to trust that hope could lead her somewhere worthwhile. The program she had enrolled in was rigorous, and Ellie quickly realized it wasn't going to be easy. The therapists and counselors were kind, but they didn't sugarcoat the work that needed to be done. She had to face the anger, the abandonment, the fear that had ruled her life for so long. It was exhausting, emotionally, mentally, and sometimes physically. But with each small victory, Ellie felt more empowered. She learned to confront the past, and in doing so, she reclaimed the pieces of herself that she had buried deep under layers of survival instincts. In the beginning, it was simple things, learning to wake up early, to take pride in the little accomplishments like finishing an assignment or sharing a thought during a group session. These moments felt like victories, each one helping Ellie piece together a new version of herself. She had learned how to hide from the world, but now she was learning how to step into it, one hesitant step at a time. Vanessa continued to be Ellie's steadfast guide through this new chapter. Despite the differences in their lives, they shared a deep connection that transcended social class and wealth. They were both women who had fought to be seen. While Vanessa had battled with her family's expectations and her own desire to use her privilege for good, Ellie had fought to survive in a world that had all but forgotten her. And now, in the most unexpected of ways, they had found each other. "Ellie, look at you," Vanessa said one afternoon as they sat together in the park, sipping hot chocolate. Vanessa's ankle had long since healed, but her kindness and support had become even more vital to Ellie than her physical recovery. "You've come so far since I met you. You're not the same person you were back then." Ellie shrugged, trying to hide the smile that tugged at the corners of her mouth. "I don't know. I still feel like I'm just pretending sometimes. Like I'm about to wake up and realize it's all a dream." Vanessa laughed softly, her voice full of affection. "It's not a dream, Ellie. This is real. You've earned every step of the way, and I'm proud of you." Ellie hesitated, glancing down at her hands as they held the warm cup. "I'm just scared, you know. Scared that I'll mess it all up, that I'll fall back into the same patterns." Vanessa placed a gentle hand on Ellie's, her touch grounding and comforting. "You've learned so much already, and you have people here who believe in you. You're not alone anymore." Ellie nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle deep in her chest. She had always been alone, at least that's how it had felt. But now, in this moment, she realized that wasn't true anymore. She had Vanessa, and she had herself. Together, they were building something that neither of them had ever expected, a real, supportive, loving connection. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Ellie continued to thrive in the program, her growth accelerating as she began to embrace the support around her. With Vanessa's encouragement, Ellie took on part-time work at a local coffee shop, a job that gave her a sense of independence and pride. She had her own paycheck now, small as it was, but it was hers, earned through hard work, and that made all the difference. She also began to explore new passions, ones that had been buried deep within her for years. One of the first things Ellie had discovered during her therapy sessions was her love for art. As a child, she had often escaped into drawing and painting, but her passion had been stifled by the chaos of her early life. Now, she had the space to reconnect with that creativity. It was Vanessa who first encouraged her to take a painting class. "You've always been so good at this, Ellie. You need to give yourself permission to do what you love," Vanessa said, her voice filled with the same gentle determination that had helped Ellie when she was at her lowest. The first time Ellie picked up a brush again, she was surprised at how natural it felt. The strokes of color on the canvas were like a release. Each line, each shape, a way of expressing the emotion she hadn't been able to verbalize before. For the first time in years, Ellie found peace in the act of creation. It wasn't about perfection or producing something for others to admire. It was about healing, about finding a voice through the quiet movement of her hands. As the months passed, Ellie's world grew bigger. She became more involved in the community, volunteering at local shelters, speaking at youth programs, and even organizing art exhibitions to raise awareness about homelessness. She used her own story to inspire others, reminding them that they weren't defined by their circumstances and that it was possible to build a future, no matter how difficult the past had been. Through all of this, Vanessa remained by her side. She had offered Ellie more than just a roof over her head. She had shown her that true wealth was in the relationships we build, in the lives we touch, and in the way we choose to use our resources. Vanessa's support had given Ellie the foundation to dream bigger, to set goals, and to pursue them with determination. One evening, several months after Ellie had first entered Vanessa's world, the two women sat together in a cozy cafe, sipping their drinks. Vanessa looked at Ellie with pride, her eyes reflecting the warmth of their journey together. "You've come so far," Vanessa said softly. "When I first met you, You were just trying to survive. Now, you're living. You're thriving. I'm so proud of you." Ellie smiled, the words feeling like a weight lifting off her shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without you, Vanessa. You gave me a chance when no one else did. You showed me what it means to believe in myself." Vanessa shook her head, her voice filled with affection. "No, Ellie, you did this. You took the chance. You made the choice to change." Ellie paused, thinking for a moment. "I know," she said, her voice steady and full of resolve. "But I wouldn't have known how to take that chance if it hadn't been for you." In that moment, Ellie realized that their bond wasn't just a one-sided story of someone being saved. It was a partnership, a connection forged through mutual respect, understanding, and love. Vanessa had shown Ellie that even the darkest paths could lead to light, but it was Ellie's strength, her resilience, and her willingness to grow that had turned their meeting into something transformative for both of them. As they sat there, the sounds of the city outside filled the air. The chatter of people going about their lives, oblivious to the quiet transformation that had taken place in their midst. And Ellie, for the first time in her life, felt that she truly belonged, not just in this world, but in the future she was creating for herself. The road ahead was still long, and there would undoubtedly be challenges along the way. But for the first time, Ellie didn't fear the future. She was ready to meet it head-on, armed with the lessons she had learned, the love she had found, and the strength she had rediscovered within herself. The future was hers to create, and with Vanessa by her side, Ellie knew that anything was possible. The bonds that shape us. As the months unfolded, Ellie's life began to shift in ways she never thought possible. The world she had once known, the cold, empty streets, the loneliness of survival, was receding into the past. It wasn't that Ellie had erased the memories of her struggles. They were still there, tucked into the corners of her heart, but they no longer had the same hold over her. She had found something new, something worth fighting for, a future, a purpose, and a sense of belonging. The connection between her and Vanessa grew stronger every day. They weren't just mentor and mentee anymore. They were a family in their own right. There was an understanding between them, a quiet bond that didn't need words. They both knew how fragile life could be, how quickly things could change, and because of that, they cherished each other more deeply. Vanessa had shown Ellie what true wealth meant, not just in terms of money, but in relationships, in the ability to touch someone's life and change it for the better. As Ellie started to embrace her new life, she began to realize that she wanted to offer that same sense of belonging to others. She had been given a second chance at life, and now she was determined to help others find that same hope. But even with the support and love that surrounded her, Ellie knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There were days when doubt crept in, when the weight of her past threatened to resurface. There were nights when she lay awake, heart pounding, unsure if she had truly left her old self behind. Could she really change? Was she truly worthy of all the love and opportunities that were now coming her way? Vanessa, always perceptive, could see the moments when Ellie struggled. She knew that the scars of Ellie's past wouldn't fade overnight, but she also knew that Ellie had the strength to face them head-on. Vanessa never tried to minimize Ellie's feelings, nor did she push her to forget what had happened. Instead, she encouraged Ellie to confront those feelings, to let them be a part of her story without letting them define her. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult therapy session, where Ellie had spoken about the feelings of abandonment she still carried, Vanessa took her out for a walk in the park. The spring air was crisp, and the flowers were beginning to bloom, a stark contrast to the inner turmoil Ellie often felt. They walked in comfortable silence, side by side, their footsteps in sync with the rhythm of the world around them. Vanessa broke the silence first. "You know, I still think about what you said the other day, about the fear of falling back into old habits." Ellie glanced over at her, hesitant at first. "I guess I'm just afraid. Afraid that I'm not strong enough, that I'll go back to being the girl I used to be, small, invisible, lost." Vanessa smiled softly, her eyes kind and knowing. Ellie, you've already faced the hardest part. You've come so far from where you started, and it wasn't easy. You've built something from nothing, and that takes strength, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. That's what I'm here for, and that's what everyone around you is here for. You have a support system now, and you're not going to lose yourself in the process. You're growing, evolving. Ellie nodded slowly, taking in Vanessa's words. There was truth in them, even if it was hard to fully believe. But the longer she spent in Vanessa's presence, the more she started to realize that she could change. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live alongside it. It was about finding the courage to step into the future, even with all the uncertainty that it brought. As time passed, Ellie began to take on more responsibilities. She still worked at the coffee shop, but now she was also volunteering at a local shelter, helping other homeless youth find the resources they needed to start anew. Her story, once one of despair, had become a beacon of hope for others who were still struggling to find their way. Ellie had begun to understand that it wasn't enough to simply receive help. She wanted to give it back. She had seen firsthand how one act of kindness could change a life, and she was determined to be that act for someone else. It was at the shelter that she met Claire, a young girl who had only recently become homeless after running away from an abusive home. Claire was quiet at first, her eyes constantly darting around as if expecting someone to hurt her. She reminded Ellie of herself when she had first hit the streets, scared, unsure, and desperate for someone to see her. Ellie knew the feeling all too well, and she made it her mission to reach out to Claire, to show her that there was still hope, that she wasn't alone. It took time, but slowly Claire began to open up. Ellie shared her own story with her, not to make Claire feel sorry for her, but to show her that change was possible. They began to spend time together. Ellie would bring Claire art supplies, and they would sit in the shelter, sketching and painting, finding solace in each other's company. One evening, as they sat side by side in the quiet corner of the shelter, Ellie turned to Claire with a smile. You know, when I first started painting, I didn't think I could do it. I was too afraid of messing up. But one day, I just picked up a brush and started. And now, I can't imagine my life without it. Claire looked at her with wide eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. You really think I can do that too? Ellie's heart swelled with hope as she looked at Claire. I know you can. It's about giving yourself permission to try, to not be afraid of failing, because failing is just another step toward learning. Claire smiled, a small tentative smile that was the beginning of something beautiful. Ellie could see the spark of possibility in her eyes, and it filled her with a sense of purpose. She wasn't just helping Claire, she was helping herself too. This was the reason she had fought so hard to change, to be the person who could give back, to pass on the kindness and hope that Vanessa had shown her. As Ellie continued to mentor Claire, she found herself gaining new strength. She was learning to be patient with herself, to acknowledge her own progress without getting lost in self-doubt. The more she gave, the more she received in return. Love, connection, and a sense of belonging that had once seemed impossible. But Ellie's journey wasn't just about helping others. It was about becoming the person she was always meant to be. She began to apply to colleges, researching scholarships for students who had experienced homelessness. Vanessa helped her every step of the way, offering guidance and encouragement, but Ellie was the one who had to do the work. It was her future, her choice, and she was determined to make the most of it. One day, after Ellie received her acceptance letter to a local university, she sat with Vanessa in their favorite cafe, both of them holding cups of hot chocolate as they stared at the letter in disbelief. It had been a long road, but Ellie had made it. She had built a life for herself from the ground up, and now she had the opportunity to pursue a degree, to change her future in ways she had once only dreamed of. Vanessa looked at her, tears glistening in her eyes. You did it, Ellie. I knew you could. Ellie felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at Vanessa, overwhelmed by the love and support she had received. I couldn't have done it without you, Vanessa. You've given me everything." Vanessa smiled, her eyes warm and proud. "No, Ellie. You gave it to yourself. I just helped you see it." In that moment, Ellie realized that the road ahead, though still uncertain, was one she was ready to face. She had learned that change wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience. It was about finding strength in vulnerability, courage in uncertainty, and love in the most unexpected places. With Vanessa by her side, and a future full of possibility ahead of her, Ellie knew that the journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the power to face them, because she had learned the most important lesson of all. She was enough. A new legacy. As the seasons passed and Ellie settled into the rhythm of her new life, she began to see the world through a different lens. She had once viewed everything in terms of survival, how to get by, how to shield herself from hurt, how to stay invisible. But now, the world felt full of possibilities, and each day brought a new opportunity to create something better, something meaningful. The change was subtle at first. She no longer woke up in a haze of fear and doubt. Instead, she faced each morning with a quiet sense of purpose. She had learned to manage the quiet rumble of anxiety that still occasionally swept through her, especially when she was faced with something new or unknown. But even then, Ellie had learned to face those moments with a strength that was born not from perfection, but from resilience. Vanessa's constant presence in her life continued to be a source of unwavering support. It wasn't just the big gestures, the scholarships, the guidance, the doors that opened, but the small things too. The late-night conversations, the encouragement to chase her dreams, and the simple reminder that no matter how far Ellie had come, there was still more to be achieved. Vanessa had taught her that growth wasn't a destination, but a journey, one that didn't end when you reached a certain milestone. One bright spring morning, as Ellie walked to the local university where she was now a full-time student, she thought back to that first day she had walked into Vanessa's office. She had been uncertain, her heart heavy with the weight of her past, unsure of what her future could even look like. But now, as she passed the bustling campus, her heart was light. She was on a path, one she had carved for herself, with the tools and wisdom Vanessa had given her. She had made friends at school, people who saw her for who she was, not as the girl who had once been homeless, but as the ambitious, driven person she had become. She had found a community that supported her, a group of people who celebrated her victories and stood by her during moments of doubt. In many ways, they reminded her of the kindness Vanessa had shown her when they first met, a kindness that had completely altered the course of her life. As the semester moved forward, Ellie began to immerse herself in the work she had chosen to study, social work. She had realized, through her own experience, how much it meant to have someone help guide you through the dark, to offer hope when it seemed impossible. And she wanted to be that person for others. Every class she attended, every assignment she completed, brought her closer to her goal, to work with at-risk youth, to help them find a way out of the darkness she had once been lost in. One afternoon, as Ellie was working on a project at the university library, she received a call from Vanessa. "Ellie," Vanessa's voice crackled with excitement, "there's something I want to talk to you about. Something big. Can we meet at the cafe later?" Curious, Ellie agreed to meet Vanessa that evening. As she sat across from her at their usual cafe, Ellie noticed the glint of something more than just excitement in Vanessa's eyes. There was a fire in them, a sense of urgency. "You remember how I've been trying to find a way to use my wealth for good, to create lasting change for people who need it the most?" Vanessa asked, leaning forward in her chair. Ellie nodded. Of course, she remembered. That was how it all began. Vanessa smiled softly, but there was an undeniable sense of determination in her voice. "Well, I've decided to take the next step. I'm starting a foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping young people who've been affected by homelessness, just like you were. It's going to be a safe space for them, a place where they can get the support they need to change their lives. Whether it's through education, counseling, job training, or simply giving them a chance to belong somewhere. Ellie's breath caught in her chest. She had always known that Vanessa had the resources and the drive to make an impact, but hearing it put so plainly, this was no longer just an idea. It was happening. "You're going to do it?" Ellie asked, her voice filled with awe. Vanessa nodded, her smile widening. "I'm going to do it, and I want you to be a part of it." Ellie's heart swelled. "Me?" Vanessa took a deep breath, her eyes softening with affection. "Yes, Ellie. You've come so far. You've been through so much, and now you're in a position to make a real difference. I want you to be the face of the foundation. I want you to speak to those kids, to tell them that there is hope, that their circumstances don't define them. I've seen the way you've touched lives already, just by sharing your story. I believe you're the right person to help lead this." Ellie sat back, her mind racing. To think that the girl who had once been invisible, the girl who had feared the world and everyone in it, would now be someone's role model, someone who could guide others through their darkest days. It was almost too much to comprehend. But as she looked into Vanessa's eyes, she saw a trust that ran deep, a belief that Ellie could do this, and for the first time, Ellie truly believed it herself. "I don't know what to say," Ellie whispered, overwhelmed by the weight of Vanessa's words. "This is so much. I never thought I could do something like this. I never thought I'd be the one to help anyone." Vanessa reached across the table and placed a hand on hers. "Ellie, you've been helping people your whole life. You may not have realized it, but every time you gave a piece of yourself to someone, you were already doing the work. Now you have the chance to do it on a bigger scale. You have the power to create real change." Ellie sat in stunned silence, the weight of the responsibility sinking in. But as she looked at Vanessa, she realized something. This was her next step. This wasn't just about her healing anymore. This was about giving back, using her story to inspire those who were still lost in the darkness she had once lived in. She wasn't just someone who had survived anymore. She was a guide, a mentor, and a beacon of hope. The days that followed were filled with planning, meetings, and research. Vanessa's foundation began to take shape, with Ellie playing an integral role in developing its mission and vision. The foundation was not just a place where homeless youth would find temporary shelter. It was a place where they could rebuild their lives, where they could find the support they needed to flourish. It would offer scholarships, job training, access to mental health services, and mentorship from people who had been where they were. It was a safe space, a sanctuary from the streets, but also a stepping stone to a brighter future. Ellie found herself stepping into her new role with a sense of purpose and confidence that surprised even her. She wasn't afraid to speak in front of crowds anymore, to share her story with a room full of people who needed to hear it. She knew, deep down, that her words had power. She had the ability to change lives, just as Vanessa had changed hers. Months later, as the foundation held its first fundraiser, Ellie stood at the front of a large ballroom, facing a crowd of donors and supporters. She had come a long way from the scared, lost girl she had once been. And tonight, she was going to tell her story. It wasn't just a tale of hardship. It was a story of hope, of resilience, and of the unbreakable bonds that had carried her through it all. 2 years ago, I didn't believe I had a future, Ellie began, her voice steady as she looked out at the audience. I was homeless, abandoned, and lost. But I met someone who showed me that my past didn't define me. That person was Vanessa. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And now I'm here, standing before you, because of the people who have supported me and the foundation that's helping me give back. As Ellie spoke, her words resonated with the room, and when she finished, the applause that followed wasn't just for her. It was for the hope she represented, for the countless lives that would be changed because of her journey. Vanessa stood at the back of the room, watching Ellie with tears in her eyes. She had always known that Ellie had greatness within her. And now, Ellie was stepping into that greatness, creating a legacy that would outlast them both. The future was no longer uncertain. It was a promise. And together, Ellie and Vanessa would continue to build a world where hope and opportunity were not just for the few, but for everyone. The ripple effect. As the foundation gained traction, Ellie felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, one she had never experienced before. There was a unique power in knowing that her actions could change someone else's life, that by simply being herself, she could help others navigate the darkest parts of their journeys. The weight of this truth was both humbling and invigorating, and every day, she felt more compelled to continue pushing forward, to give more, to be more. At the same time, Ellie began to understand that leadership wasn't just about telling people what to do. It was about being a reflection of the change you wanted to see. It wasn't enough to simply create a place of support for homeless youth. She needed to show them how to believe in themselves, how to build resilience, and how to take the first step, even when the road seemed impossible to walk. She had been where they were, and now she was their guide. As the months went by, the foundation grew, offering scholarships, housing, mentorship, and job training. But it wasn't just about providing tangible resources. It was about creating a sense of community. Ellie and Vanessa worked tirelessly to foster an environment where young people who had once felt abandoned could come together, share their experiences, and learn from one another. The community that grew around the foundation was a testament to the power of human connection, the healing that came from being seen, heard, and valued. One afternoon, while preparing for a new round of interviews for their mentorship program, Ellie sat in her office at the foundation, reflecting on how far they had come. The walls around her were adorned with photos of the first group of young people who had participated in the program, each smiling, filled with hope and the promise of a new future. Ellie smiled as she looked at their faces, thinking about the transformation they had all undergone together. Some had gone on to college, others had started their own businesses, and a few had become mentors themselves, passing on the support they had received to the next generation. Despite the progress, there were still moments of uncertainty. Ellie often found herself questioning if they were doing enough. Was their impact large enough? Could they really change the course of so many lives? And what about the ones they couldn't reach, the ones still lost in the shadows, unable to find the courage to step out? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Claire, the same young girl Ellie had mentored in the shelter. Now, Claire was part of the Foundation's program, a bright, determined young woman who had turned her life around, much like Ellie had. Claire was wearing a broad smile, holding a folder of papers in her hand. "Hey, Ellie," Claire said, walking into the office. "I just wanted to let you know that I got the scholarship. I'm going to college." Ellie's heart swelled with pride. Claire had come so far, and now she was about to take another huge step forward. "That's amazing, Claire," Ellie said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you. This is a huge accomplishment." Claire beamed, her eyes shining with excitement. "I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. You showed me that I didn't have to be defined by my past. I'm going to study psychology so I can help people the way you helped me." Ellie stood up and walked over to Claire, giving her a hug. She was proud beyond words. Claire wasn't just going to college. She was going to make a difference in the world, just as Ellie had done, just as Vanessa had believed they both could. It was a ripple effect, one that had started with a single act of kindness and had now spread across an entire community. Claire stepped back, still grinning. "I was thinking, maybe when I graduate, I could work with the foundation. Maybe I could help guide others like you helped me." Ellie felt her eyes well up with tears. This was the dream she had held on to when she had first joined the program. The dream of paying it forward, of continuing the cycle of compassion and empowerment. It was happening, in front of her eyes, and she couldn't have been prouder. "That sounds like an incredible idea," Ellie said, her voice full of emotion. "I'd be honored to have you as part of the team." Over the next few weeks, Ellie found herself pouring more energy into the foundation than ever before. But this time, it wasn't just about the logistics or the programs. It was about creating a culture. It was about making sure that every young person who walked through the door knew they weren't just a number or a statistic. They were individuals with potential, with dreams, and with a community that believed in them. Ellie began to see the foundation as more than just a place for homeless youth. It was a movement. It was about creating a culture of empowerment that would ripple out into every corner of the world. Vanessa, of course, continued to be Ellie's steadfast partner in this mission. The two women had formed a bond that was unshakable, and their work together had become more than just business. It had become a shared calling, a mission that had taken on a life of its own. They were no longer just helping others. They were reshaping the narrative of what it meant to come from nothing and build something that could last. The media began to take notice of their work. What had started as a small local initiative began to garner attention from across the country. Stories of the foundation's success, of young people who had turned their lives around with the right support, of former homeless youth who were now thriving, spread like wildfire. Ellie and Vanessa were asked to speak at conferences, to share their vision for a world where young people in need were not just given charity, but given a chance to succeed. And Ellie, once a girl too afraid to speak her truth, now stood before crowds, sharing her journey with the world. She spoke about the importance of community, of seeing people for who they truly were, not just the circumstances they came from. As the foundation's influence grew, so did Ellie's understanding of what it meant to be a leader. She wasn't leading from a place of power or control. She was leading from a place of empathy, compassion, and shared experience. And that made all the difference. The young people who entered the foundation's programs didn't just see Ellie as someone who had overcome homelessness. They saw her as a mentor, a guide, and a reflection of what was possible. They saw someone who had fought through the same darkness they were facing and had made it to the other side. A year after Claire's scholarship announcement, the foundation hosted its first annual gala. The venue was grand, filled with donors, volunteers, and supporters who had all contributed to the growth of the foundation. As Ellie walked around, meeting with people who had been touched by their work, she couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. This wasn't just about a program anymore. It was a living, breathing movement that was changing lives on a scale Ellie had once only dreamed about. As the evening drew to a close, Ellie stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd. Vanessa stood beside her, beaming with pride. Ellie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything they had built, and smiled. "This," Ellie said, her voice steady, "is just the beginning. What we've built here is a ripple that will continue to grow and spread to people who need it most. A ripple that will change lives, not just for a moment, but for a lifetime." The applause that followed wasn't just for Ellie. It was for everyone who had come together to make this foundation a reality. It was for the young people who had found hope through their work. And it was for the future they were all building together. And in that moment, Ellie realized that the ripple she had started, one small act of kindness that had sparked a chain of events, had become a wave that was sweeping across the world, bringing change, hope, and a new legacy to those who needed it most. The legacy of hope. Years passed, and the foundation continued to flourish, expanding its reach and touching countless lives along the way. Ellie, now a recognized leader in the field of social work, watched with pride as the young people who had once walked through the foundation's doors as strangers became mentors, entrepreneurs, and advocates for change. They had gone on to accomplish things that seemed unimaginable when they first arrived, and many returned to give back, just as Ellie had done. Each of their stories was a testament to the power of compassion, of support, and of the unwavering belief that everyone, no matter their past, deserves a chance at a future. Ellie often thought back to the cold December evening when she had first met Vanessa on the streets of Chicago. It had been the turning point in her life, the moment when everything changed. But what she had come to realize over the years was that it wasn't just the moment that mattered. It was the series of moments that followed, the small acts of kindness, the people who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself, and the opportunity she had been given to rebuild her life. The foundation was a reflection of everything Ellie had come to understand about the world, about the way love, hope, and human connection could heal even the deepest wounds. It wasn't about offering a handout. It was about offering a hand up. It was about empowering those who had been forgotten, lifting them up so they could see their own worth, and showing them that no one was beyond redemption. Ellie often found herself sitting in her office, looking out over the city of Chicago, a place that had once been filled with pain and loneliness, but now felt like a symbol of resilience and possibility. She was no longer the lost, invisible girl sitting on the steps of an abandoned bookstore. She was a woman who had found her place in the world, a woman who had made a difference. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Claire, one of the young women she had mentored since the Foundation's earliest days. "Hey Ellie, I just wanted to let you know that I'm graduating this weekend. I'm starting my first job at the local youth shelter next week. I couldn't have done this without you. Thank you for believing in me." Ellie smiled as she read the message, her heart swelling with pride. This was why she had worked so hard. This was why she had given everything she had to this cause. To see the faces of young people who had once been lost, who had once felt hopeless, now standing tall with their own dreams, ready to build their futures. She quickly typed back a reply, her hands trembling with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Claire. You've come so far. This is just the beginning of an amazing journey. Keep believing in yourself, and remember, I'll always be here for you." Ellie sat back in her chair, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The road had been long, and at times, the challenges had seemed insurmountable. But with each step, with each person she had met along the way, she had learned the power of resilience, of compassion, and of the simple yet profound act of believing in another person. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was the story of everyone who had walked through the Foundation's doors, of all the lives that had been changed because someone took the time to reach out, to see them, and to help them find their way. And it was a story that would continue for years to come, as each new generation passed on the legacy of hope that had been built on the kindness of a single stranger. Ellie stood up from her desk, her heart full of gratitude for the journey she had been on. The Foundation wasn't just a building or a program. It was a living, breathing entity, shaped by the hearts and hands of everyone who had contributed to its mission. And as long as she had breath in her body, Ellie knew she would continue to lead, to guide, and to show others what was possible when we lift each other up. She walked to the window, looking out at the city she had once feared, now filled with promise. The world was far from perfect, but Ellie had learned that even the smallest act of kindness could create ripples of change. She had seen it, felt it, and now she was living it. And in that moment, Ellie knew that her journey wasn't just about finding her place in the world. It was about creating a world where everyone had the chance to find theirs. Because in the end, the greatest gift we can give to one another is the belief that we are worthy of a future. With that thought, Ellie smiled, ready for whatever came next, knowing that she was not alone, and that the work they had started together would continue to change lives for generations to come. The ripple effect would never stop, and that, she realized, was her legacy. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.